Lou here with the second part about confusions of game design, symmetric and balanced. You can have a game ending unbalance or imbalance. When something triggers the end of the game, if it's a turn-based game and you don't finish the round, some players get one more play than others do. The players who played early in the round play one more time than the players who play late in the round, depending on who's playing when the game ends. And you've thrown away your balance, though the difference can be quite subtle. In general, the more rounds the game takes, the less difference it's going to make. I like finish the round so that everybody plays the same number of times, and it's exciting because those players who are playing later are trying to catch up desperately because they know they've only got one more play. And this also gives the players who play later in the game a chance to compensate a little for whatever advantage they lost to the first mover. Now in two-player games, you're not going to be able to, you might be able to do that and it might have an advantage, but in general, if you have a two-player symmetric game and it has perfect information and is turn-based, then what you really have is a solvable puzzle. And the first move is going to provide a significant advantage no matter what, unless you do something to fix it. And I suggested one possible fix for chess, though I suspect it would end with another imbalance, but maybe not as big a one. Now, does balance require symmetry? No. After all, single-player video games are typically strongly asymmetric. Often you have your avatar and you're up against hundreds or thousands of opponents. But the game can be well balanced. Asymmetric games for more than one player can be balanced. Most historically based games are asymmetric because history doesn't fall into nice, even, exactly same situation arrangements. Some of these games are not well balanced because the designer allows the imbalance of the historical situation to dominate. But many are well balanced thanks to variable victory conditions. For example, in a two-player game, highly asymmetric, if the defender can hold out for X turns, they win, otherwise the attacker wins. Requires quite a bit of playtesting to find that sweet spot, but it can be done. Britannia is an example of a four-player, very asymmetric game that is, when played by experts, well balanced. Now the caveat there is when played by experts. When it's played by inexperienced players, it's probably not very well balanced, although I couldn't say offhand who was going to win, perhaps red. But you always have to think what level of expertise you've designed your game for. So in multi-sided symmetric games, there can be an advantage to whoever plays first, and consequently you should keep track when you're playtesting of the order of play position for each player when the game ends. For example, if the game has scoring, write the scores in the order of play. For example, 20, 24, 10, 17, where the second player has won the game of four players. Then ask yourself, does one position win much more than the others? If so, you have to fix it, or at least it would be desirable to fix it. Then we have what I call player-derived imbalance. It's possible when the players are not of a expertise or experience level compared to what the game is designed for, that the game will be imbalanced, especially if it's asymmetric. But that imbalance may disappear when it's played by people of the expected expertise. Now, we used to design games always for experts, but nowadays I think many games are designed for inexperienced players, players who perhaps played once or twice. And that's a choice that has to be made. In general, my opinion is, if you don't design for expert players, the game is not going to be as good a game in general. But insofar as many games nowadays are only played once or only played a few times, it makes a lot of sense to design the game for inexperienced or inexpert players. Now, what happens with a game that's designed for experts, especially if it's asymmetric like Britannia, is you get a lot of people who play once or who are not very good strategic game players in the case of a war game, and they say, oh, this game sucks, such and such a color can't win, or such and such a color always wins. And often it's the same color that people are talking about. If I had a quarter for every time somebody'd said that, I'd have a new car. But play amongst experts in tournaments shows that the game is actually quite balanced. So you have to ask yourself who you designed the game for and eradicate imbalances for that level of player. Ideally, a game should be balanced for all levels of players, but I suspect that's very, very difficult to do. Then you can have temporary imbalance. In asymmetric games, this would be, not symmetric ones. One player can appear to be way ahead or way behind because his side accumulates points much faster or much slower in the early game. So it's a temporary imbalance, not a true imbalance, and it'll work itself out over the course of the whole game. This is especially common, of course, in two-player war games. When players start, it may look like one side's way ahead of the other. And it may be, but there'll be compensation like reinforcements and so on that'll even it out over the course of the game. So as an example, in four-player Britannia, the Romans, yellow, score a ton of points early on, which is inevitable. But what matters in the long run is how well they did compared to the Roman average, because they don't score so many points later with other nations, and it evens out. But that takes a lot of playtesting. The proof is in the playtesting. If there's an imbalance, even in a symmetric game, it'll come out given enough testing. That is, if you pay attention to the possibility. But if you assume that symmetric equals balanced, then good luck, you've got problems.